So we are studying the book of Esther, chapter 3. Okay, so we'll, although we normally give an explanation each verse at a time, but we're going to have a group of verses that go here together. So we'll run through them and then we'll give an explanation of all of them at one shot. So it says, chapter 3, verse 1. We started chapter 3. We're in chapter 3, verse 8. Verse 8. My apologies. Chapter 3, verse 8. So Haman said to the king Achashverosh, Yeshno am echad, there's this one nation, mefuzal mefayrad, they're scattered and dispersed amongst all the other nations. All the provinces of your kingdom, the Sehem Shainos, their laws are different, we call from all the people. And they don't keep the king's laws. The Melech and Shayvel Anicham, and therefore it's not fitting for the king to tolerate them. So he says, verse 9, Im al hamelech toiv, if the king sees it as, pleases the king, it's good in the king's perception. Ikasev la'abdam, write or record that they should be destroyed. And I will pay 10,000 silver talents in the hands of those who perform the duties for deposit in the king's treasury. Right, so this is his slander to King Achashverosh, had permission to, God forbid, kill the Jewish people. So he was a very skillful speaker. Again, as we've mentioned, the Megillah, of course, is written while Achashverosh is still the king. So we can't say outright and clearly that Achashverosh was a horrible anti-Semite who wanted to get us as well. Right? All the blame gets put on Haman. So this is how the conversation actually went, and it's just alluded to in the Hebrew words. So he said, Yeshna am echad, there's one people. Now, the word Yeshna, there is similar to the word Yeshenim, they're sleeping. Because what happened, the conversation, Haman came to Achashverosh, and he says he wants to get the Jews. So Achashverosh says he's afraid. He sees in the past that all those who've attacked the Jews, maybe they win in the short term, but look what happens to them. He says, I'm also afraid of their God. So Haman told them they're sleeping. They're not keeping mitzvahs. They've assimilated. God's not going to come protect them. So then he says, okay, but the rabbis, there's still some people. There's a group of, maybe it's a minority, but there's a religious minority that are still keeping the mitzvahs. So he says, echad, they're one people, right? In other words, they're all responsible. So since we have the majority not doing what's meant to be done, everyone's responsible. Then when he said that they're scattered, he means and dispersed, they're defenseless. They're not unified. They're not going to be able to come together to be able to protect themselves. So you don't have to worry that anyone's going to come for revenge on a physical level either. So he tells him, you don't have to worry about God, and you don't have to worry about humans coming for revenge. Then when he says that the laws are different, he was mocking us. They don't eat with the Persians' food, and we don't need to marry with them. And when he says it doesn't befit the king to tolerate them, Haman told the king like this. He said, if a fly would go into their wine, they would take out the fly, throw away the fly, and drink the wine. But if the king just touched the wine, they throw away the wine and not drink it. Okay, now in this claim, there's a bit of truth, just to explain the concepts. So, in respect to kashrus, it doesn't matter that a bug or something was on it. You could throw it away and still eat it. Now, whether you'd want to or not is a separate issue. You know, if it's like, what's the fly doing in my soup? You know, it looks like backstroke, all right? So whether you still want to have that bowl of soup is another story. But technically you could. However, not necessarily. From the laws of kashrut, there's still a mitzvah of baal tishaksu, right? There's an avay, we're not allowed to be disgusting. So there's certain things. So I'll give it, I don't want to gross people out, but technically manure is not, there's not a kashrus problem. In other words, it's waste. It's not considered a food, but you can't eat it anyway because I don't know why you want to, but you can't because there's a separate commandment about the shaksu. You can't be disgusting. So whether you could actually drink the wine is a separate issue, but from a kashrus perspective, it's true. You took out the a friend of mine resigned from being a kosher supervisor.
Rabbi?
Yes.
I'm sorry. You know, if there's thrips, for example, in broccoli or in certain kinds of leafy vegetables or so forth, you can't eat them. They have to be washed. They have to be thoroughly washed.
Correct. You have to get them out. So we're talking about that he threw the fly out.
Yeah, but in the drink, if the fly lays eggs in the drink, you really can't drink it either. I mean, it's
well, I guess we're talking about a fly was there for a second or two. You know, you throw it out. Didn't have a chance. In concept, if you can remove the bugs from anything, it's no problem. Sometimes in practice, it's very difficult or pretty much impossible to do so. I was saying a friend of mine once resigned from a kosher supervising position. He opened a box of lettuce. It smelled terrible. And he noticed in the lettuce, there's all these maggots. And at the bottom was a dead rat. And he wanted to throw the box out. And the restaurant owner did not want to throw the box out. And they spoke to the certifying person at the kosher. We're not going to say which one. It's not a major one. So I'm sure it was a very localized one. So wherever you are, you don't have the product. So it's not a problem. So there's no advantage of telling it would just be lashon hara. But he told them, well, it's not kashrus problem. Just wash the maggots off the leaves and lettuce leaves, you can use them. So this fellow refused to do that and he resigned. Right? So it was two separate issues. But in concept, if you took the fly out, it would the wine would be kosher. Now, when a non-Jew touches wine, we've got a few issues. So let's speak about the original issue, and then we'll speak about the secondary issue. The original issue is relevant to our story, but since we're mentioning it, we'll discuss the second issue as well. So the first issue was, in ancient times, people would regularly make wine libations. They would offer wine to their idols. And, they have in different religious, different churches, different things today, they pour wine and different things as part of their sacrament, and it still happens, but it was much more common. And therefore there was a concern any time a non-Jew actually touched the wine, which means the actual liquid, not the bottle or the container, right? Anytime they touch the actual liquid, they may have had the intention of offering it to the idol. They're not talking about they had a sip from it. Anytime they put their hand in it, because you don't normally put your hand into a cup of wine or a barrel of wine. So if they put their hand into the wine, we have to have a presumption that they had offered the wine or dedicated the wine to the idol worship. So therefore, if a non-Jew touches the actual wine, there's an automatic presumption that it's yain nesach, it's wine that has been offered. So therefore, what Haman said was true. If a fly would go in the wine, you could take the fly out and drink the wine. But if Achashverosh should put his finger on the wine, then the Jew has to throw it out and he can't drink the wine. Of course, it wasn't explained. The issues behind it weren't explained. It was just to insult the king, to make him angry at the Jewish people. Since we've mentioned the wine, we'll just say at a later time, right, during the Greek occupation, pre-Hanukkah, the Greek occupation, there was an additional decree made on non-Jewish wine, right? And that is, even if a non-Jew touched the bottle, move the wine by turning on a tap, to let it out. And the main issue behind this was because, unfortunately, Greek time was the first time you had Jews and non-Jews sort of live together in the same neighborhoods, right? In the first Beis Hamikdash era, although you might have had the Plishtim in the next city, but you weren't hanging out together. If a Plishti came, it's time to draw swords. In the Greek times, the Greeks originally had no interest in harming the Jews physically. Right? Their goal was not to kill the Jews physically. Their goal was to kill the Jews spiritually. They wanted to take away Torah. In other words, you can read your Torah, but as a book of legends, a classic a book. You want to keep some traditions, you can keep traditions, but only ones that make sense, because spirituality doesn't exist. That was the Greek philosophy. Only when the Jews refused to listen did there become a war. But the war was a means to an end. Unlike Haman, right? So we have these two rabbinical yontivs. Purim is the Haman, he wanted to kill the Jews physically. And unfortunately, we've had that over the years. And then there are those who, like Hanukkah, want to kill the Jews spiritually. And we've had that over the years. When the Crusaders came, said convert or die, their goal wasn't necessarily kill anyone. They'd be quite happy if everyone converted. Right? The goal was to kill the Jews spiritually. And these two yontivs are the prototypes for all of history. But in that time, where the Jews and the Greeks lived together in peace for a period of time, and there was a large amount of assimilation. So the rabbis at the time forbade drinking non-Jewish wine. Wine was the main drink that people would drink at meals and socially, and it was to curb intermarriage. So today we have a decree in place that even wine that wasn't directly touched or different things. There was any wine, only wine that was made by Jews, that Jews only touched. Even if they had non-Jewish workers, there's only a small amount of things they can actually do. So only specifically kosher-made wine we're allowed to drink today. And then it has to have a double seal, right? Which is why you see in the kosher wine, could be other wines that would also, but in the kosher wine specifically, you'll have a cork with some type of symbol on the cork and another seal on top.
Rabbi?
A lid that's sealed with another type of seal on top. And So if it's mavushal, if it's been cooked,
Yeah.
then it's not so much of an issue. So pasteurized wine is considered cooked. But if it's unpasteurized, many of the expensive wines, they say the pasteurization loses takes away some of the flavor. So if it's not mavushal, it's not cooked, and it'll say on the bottle whether it is or isn't, but under or next to the hechsher, the kosher certification. Then if once it's opened, if a non-Jew touches it, then we can't drink it any longer. It touches the bottle even. Okay, so that's the wine. So that's what he said to him. Then he said, just record it. In other words, you don't have to do anything yourself. Just give a blanket permission, and there's enough anti-Semites in the empire, don't worry, we'll take care of it. Then the next thing he says to the king, 10,000 silver talents, right? This was the value of an entire nation. He says, I'll give that to you. You're not going to lose a penny. So that was how Haman came and approached the king. You're not going to lose any tax revenue. Nothing's going to happen. And he said Haman said he'll finance the ones who will do it, God forbid. So also, even the actual act won't cost the king anything. That was Haman's approach. Okay, so let's see what Achashverosh's reply was. Verse 10. The king took off his ring, his signet ring, from his hand, and he gave it to Haman, the son of Hamdasa, the descendant of the king Agag, the oppressor of the Jews. Okay. Haman, in 11, the king said to Haman, Kesef nosanlach, I'm giving you the money. You offered me 10,000 talents of silver. Don't worry about it. It's yours. The nation, do what you like. So he gave it his ring. This ring was the ring that was sealed decrees. So Haman now had a blanket authority to do whatever he wanted independently. He didn't have to ask the king anymore. And he says to him, you can keep the money. You're doing me the favor. And the Talmud gives a parable to explain this. There was a man that he had a big mound of earth in his field, and he needed to get rid of the mound because it's covering space where he could grow crops. And another man had a big hole in his field, and he needs to fill it up so he can have level ground, so he can plow his field. So the man who has the hole says to the other farmer, "Can you sell me your dirt? Sell me the earth." So he says to him, "Take it for free. It's a gift. You're doing me a favor." So this is the parable. Haman came and said, "I'll pay you to get rid of these people." But Achashverosh was actually a huge anti-Semite himself. And he says, "Keep the money. You're doing me a favor." And again, just to highlight, this is the difference between the Amalek anti-Semite and the regular anti-Semite, right? Even though Achashverosh was a huge anti-Semite and he was happy to literally exterminate every single Jew in the world, God forbid, when it suited him, when he felt Haman was his enemy and Mordechai and Esther are his friends, when it suits him, he's nice to the Jews. Amalek, though, doesn't matter. They'll go to the end as long as they can take Jews with them. Okay, verse 12. V'yikaru Seifrei Melech b'chodesh Rishon b'shloisha asa yoim boy b'kasev kol asher tziva Haman el Achashverosh. Sorry, Achashdarpanei HaMelech So the scribes, the king's scribes were some, right, didn't have emails to send out the instructions. They had to make numerous copies and they had to be delivered. So the scribes were summoned on the 13th day of the first month, and everything was written exactly as Haman dictated to the king's, level 2 officers. Medina, and to the governors who were in charge of every province, and the officials of all the different peoples, Medina, each province, in its own script. So, they had different alphabets in different parts of the world. And each people in its own language. And it was written in the name of the king Achashverosh. And it was sealed with the king's signet ring. So that's what went out. So they made all these copies all around the world. And this said explicitly that on the 13th of Adar, everyone should rise up and kill the Jews. And in each town, this decree was hung up in the public square for everyone to see it. Okay, so there was you see there's an implication that there was two. So the governors knew who they're attacking, and the regular people, what went in the public square was to say that there's going to be a people that are going to be killed on the 13th of Adar, and people weren't sure what it was, who it was. There's a what ended up happening. Again, our sages tell us in the Midrash that what happened was one of Haman's sons told one person who the people are going to get exterminated on the 13th of Adar are. And that person just told one person. And that person just told one person. They tell him, I'll tell you a secret, but don't tell anyone else. So he goes to only one person and says, I'm going to tell you a secret, but don't tell anyone else. And before we knew it, the whole world knew. So that's how sharing secrets go out. Verse 13. And letters were sent by courier to all the provinces of the king, to destroy, slay, and exterminate all the Jews, from young to old, children and women, the Yom Echad, on one day, the Shloisha Asa l'Chodesh, Shneim Asa l'Chodesh Adar. On the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month of Adar, the Shlolim Lavois, and to plunder their possessions. So that was another incentive, right? You kill this Jewish family, God forbid, you get their house, and everything else. And copies of the document were made in every province, and they were published to all the people to be prepared for that day. That's what I said, that it went up on the notice boards. So the couriers rushed by order of the king. And the edict was also distributed in the capital, Shushan. So this king and Haman sat down to drink. They toasted, they celebrated, but the city of Shushan was bewildered. Okay. So just a few explanations. We see that that very day he wrote it, and the couriers were sent out in this huge rush. What was the rush? There's 11 months. So Haman knew that Achashverosh was a little bit fickle. In other words, he was moody. He gets angry, he kills Vashti. Comes down, he regrets it. So he wanted to make sure that this decree went out before the Achashverosh could ever change his mind. And in Persian law, once it was sealed with the royal, with the signet ring, it couldn't be overturned. So the Achashverosh and the king sat down to drink. So again, the Midrash tells us that Haman intended, it was deliberate, after the king agreed, to get him drunk and let him have a nice sleep and sleep off his drunkenness in case he would change his mind. So it says Shushan was Navoicha, normally translated as bewildered, but it means that there was this mix of reactions. So the Jews cried and the Persians celebrated. Right? There was and someone who was walking in the street, you could hear sounds of celebration and sounds of mourning. So it was confusing. It bewildered people. Unfortunately, as soon as the decree was made, terrible things started to happen in Shushan as well. So, for an example, one of the Sfarim tells us that when women they used to hang their laundry, they used to have flat roofs, and you would hang your laundry to dry on the flat roofs, and sometimes the roofs caved in. And when men went to the wells to get water, they drowned. And so this happened to the Persians in the city. As a bit of, it was happening already. And meanwhile, Achashverosh and Haman are sitting and celebrating. They're drinking and making merry, while the regular people, terrible things are happening to them. Okay, chapter 4. Any questions on chapter 3 before we start? Okay, chapter 4. Mordechai so Mordechai learned of everything that happens. Now, again, initially just said, get ready to attack the people. And later on, the second decree was going to tell them who the people were. So no one, well, at least the masses didn't know that it was the Jews. Yes, the secret got out eventually because one person told one person told one person. But Mordechai knew right from the very beginning. How did he know? He had a Ruach HaKodesh. He had a semi-prophetic vision. So either he had that in a dream, or he had a revelation from Eliyahu Novi. So and just since we're mentioning Eliyahu Novi, we'll just quickly go on a tangent. So Elijah the prophet, Eliyahu Novi. First thing is that he was Pinchas. Now we'll discuss what that means in a moment. So Pinchas was one of the Jews who left Egypt. He was the grandson of Aaron, the high priest. We're told that Pinchas and Eliyahu are the same. Now, it's not clear in the Talmud what that means. In other words, was he literally the same person who lived a long life and for whatever reason his name changed? Or was he a reincarnation, a Gilgal? Right? Just, again, a tangent on the tangent. Judaism believes in reincarnation. Generally, only people to people. Right? It's not like some other cultures, Havdil, that people or can become animals and different things, or a rock. Sometimes a soul can be stuck inside an object, like a rock or an animal, but they're not its actual soul. It's like they're imprisoned in it, but not. So it's not a reincarnation. It's a consequence. Again, we'll just use the term imprisonment, for lack of a better term. So every Jew has to fulfill the 613 mitzvahs and sometimes specific missions. So if we are lacking at the end of our life, we come back as a reincarnation. So just tell one story, just to illustrate the point. There's a famous story, the Baal Shem Tov, I think we actually even told this story, and I think someone here gave me a correction on one of the details, but whatever it is. So although I remember being corrected, I don't remember the correction. So I'll just tell the story as I heard it, and we won't worry about the correction because it's just to illustrate the point. The general point is the same. The Baal Shem Tov took. Someone came to him with a question with a chicken, right? Whether it was kosher or not, right? Because in those days the butcher shop didn't take care of everything. Well, if certain internal organs are diseased, and the animal's not going to live for a year, it's called a treifa. So you can't eat that animal even if it's been shechted. So they came with the chicken, and they wanted to know. They showed, it looks like there's one of the organs is problematic. Is it still kosher? So he says, come with me. And they go to a certain house, and in this house, there's the family has a 16-year-old boy who's disabled, and he mentally disabled, and he sits behind the oven. All he does is sit there, and he's never spoken in his life. Doesn't move, just sort of sits there all day. So the Baal Shem Tov walks into the house. The family's a little bit surprised to be visited by the Baal Shem Tov, and they're watching what he does. And he walks over to this boy who's never spoken in his life, never done anything, is totally handicapped. And he shows him the chicken, and he says, is this chicken kosher or not? So the boy stands up, he examines the chicken, and he says, it's kosher. And the family's just about to celebrate that he's spoken, and this boy just drops dead. And now they're in shock. So the Baal Shem Tov says to everyone who's there, you're probably wondering what just happened now. Everyone says, well, yeah, now that you mention it, yes. What did happen? So he said that this boy in his previous Gilgal, previous incarnation, was a rabbi. And he was someone that he learned Torah, did mitzvahs, he did stock, whatever you can imagine, he did everything right. So it comes time, he passes away, the end of however many years, he comes to the heavenly court, they look at him and they say, oh, Gan Eden. Right, this guy gets the Gan, he says, perfect, straight to heaven. And all of a sudden, a chicken walks into the court. Says, hang on. And the chicken tells his story. Now again, it means the soul of the chicken, the spirituality that keeps the chicken in existence. What's the story? One Friday afternoon, this family was preparing for Shabbos, and the chicken has a issue, and they weren't sure if it was kosher. So they sent it to the rabbi for one of the family members took it to get a decision. Is it kosher or not? Anyway, the rabbi was very busy before Shabbos, and he didn't have time to really start examining the chicken. So he just said, told the family members, throw the chicken away, give the family new money to buy a new chicken or one of our chickens, whatever it was. And the family had chicken for Shabbos. But says this chicken, I was kosher, and I could have been eaten for Shabbos, and I would have been elevated. And instead, I was thrown in the garbage. He's done me a wrong. So the heavenly court says, you're right. So the heavenly court decrees both the chicken and the rabbi are going to come back, and we're going to reenact the situation. And the rabbi is going to have to decide that it's kosher, and this chicken can be used for Shabbos and be elevated. And the rabbi says, well, hold on. This lifetime, you see, I got one thing wrong, and I'm out of Gan Eden. I have to come back. Maybe if I come back again, who knows what's going to happen? I don't want to take the chance. So they said, you're also right. So we're going to send you down in a situation where you are exempt from all mitzvahs. And he says, and that's why he was born with this handicaps. And this chicken was the reincarnation of the other chicken. And he ruled it kosher, and he's fulfilled his purpose on this earth. And that's why he passed away, and he's gone straight to Gan Eden. right? So generally speaking, we've all been here before. You know, that's already hundreds of years ago was very rare for a new soul to come. So who knows? We may have all learned together in a previous lifetime. You know, so we're all old souls. So it's unclear from, or the Talmud doesn't know. When it says that Pinchas, they have a tradition that Pinchas is Eliyahu. Does that mean literally it's the same person in the same lifetime? Or was he a reincarnation? Either way, it was the same soul. Now, this prophet Eliyahu elevated himself to such an extent. Now, we have, and again, just to, don't want to go on too many tangents, but to understand the concept, we have we're a composite being, right? We have a godly soul and we have an animal soul. And physically, we have a body, which is just an intelligent mammal. And so we're a composite being, spiritual and animal. If we let the animal control us, unfortunately, there is no more horrible animal than the human. Only humans hunt for sport. Only humans kill its own kind for no reason, and you know, in kind of quantities that the human does. Right? When the animal side of us runs the show, it's terrible. God forbid. So the godly soul, why do we have an animal soul? Why do we have an animal part? An animal part makes us want to eat, drink, seek shelter, have clothing, right? This is all essential. Otherwise we wouldn't live. And when we're born, we're animal soul dominant. Our godly soul doesn't really properly enclothe itself until bar or bas mitzvah, and then not totally until through marriage. So we're born animal soul dominant, because as a baby, you have to be totally my needs, me. Because if the baby doesn't cry every time it's hungry or cold or whatever happens to be, or needs a change, then God forbid the baby wouldn't survive. So that baby's born animal soul dominant. It needs to be that way. And the godly soul comes into us in stages. I mean, it's partly in us at birth, well, even pre-birth, right? Our soul is taught the entire Torah while we're in the womb. And then just before we're born, we're the malach, I don't want to say angel, because, you know, we don't mean little fairies with halos, but the spiritual entity that Torah speaks about, not the Western world speaks about, the spiritual energy that helps us, brings our soul into our body, makes us forget what we learned. So what's the point of learning it if you're going to forget it? Right? We all know that something that we've learned before, it's easier to learn it a second time. That's number one. And number two, how often have you learned something in Torah, and even though you, at least in our lifetime, never heard it before, it's like, wow, you know, that really gels with me. You intuitively know it's right. And this is because we've learned it before in the womb. So what happens is the malach takes our little finger, puts it, you know, we have a little gap, little indent on our lip, and you'll notice it fits exactly, and it makes you forget. So why do non-Jews have the little mark on their upper lip? Right? Only Jews should have it, because only Jews learned the Torah in the womb and had to have it forgotten. And this is because if only Jews had it, there would be no free choice. Imagine there was you know, we essentially would be walking around wearing a sign saying, I'm a Jew. And so how could anyone have free choice to be a Jew or not? So in order to have free choice, everyone has it. So our goal is to take our animal soul and to tame it. So the first, let's compare the animal soul to a wild stallion. So stage one is you lock it up, because if it's running wild, it's going to injure people, or itself, it's going to do damage. So you keep it in a corral. So our first stage is we have an animal part of ourselves. It has lusts and wants and various things. And we lock it up. We hold it back. We don't let it get what it wants. But the eventual goal is like the wild stallion is to tame it. When you tame the stallion, you can ride it. You can go faster and further than you could on your own two legs, and you carry more weight. In other words, by making it your partner, you become far more effective and stronger. And so our goal is to take the animal soul and to make it the partner of the godly soul. And then we can be so more powerful. We think about the 10 things you're most passionate about in life. And then ask yourself honestly, does it come from spirituality, my spiritual part of myself? Or does this passion come from an animal part of yourself? So I'm sure if we did it, we're not going to go around the room and everyone, share their 10. But probably most people, 8 out of 10 come from the animal soul. And therefore you see how powerful it is. And if we can harness that, and that's what a tzaddik is. A tzaddik is someone who has harnessed the animal part, both the animal soul and the body, and made it a servant, a partner of the godly soul. So they essentially have 2 godly souls. And that's why they have that strength and the extra drive and ability to do things that perhaps we don't see other people doing. So Eliyahu and Navi did this to such an extreme that not only did it become a part of his godly soul, it literally became part of his godly soul. In other words, his body transformed into spirituality. It got to a point where his physical body was not a physical body anymore. He was just pure spirituality. And therefore, when he left this world, when most of us leave this world, our soul leaves and the body remains. Eliyahu Navi, because his body became so spiritual, when his soul left this world, so did the body. There was no physical body anymore to remain in this world. And this is why we say that he, so to speak, went to heaven alive, right? Now, because he didn't actually pass away like regular people pass away, he pops in and out of history at all times, right? It's and helps and achieves things and gives advice and studies with people. And again, without going to too many stories on the sidetrack, but just one beautiful story. There was a sage that unfortunately in the 1648, 1649, there was the Ukrainians massacred the Jews, right? It's although we don't like war in any part of the world, but the thing that Ukrainians have been the most successful in the last 500 years, God forbid, is killing Jews. But if you call that success. But in one of these massacres, unfortunately, this rabbi became a widower, and he had to flee, and he's a refugee in a certain place, and he's staying with a family, and he would get up very early to study Torah. And the lady of the household used to bring him tea every morning. For whatever reason, one day she didn't bring tea, and they organized, there was an orphan girl, another refugee, who worked as a household help. She went and she brought tea. So she comes, she brings the tea, and she goes back and she brings another cup of tea. She delivers 2 cups of tea. So later in the day, this rabbi summons the head of the household who he's staying with, and he says they must speak to this maid immediately. She comes in, they think she's done something terrible to offend this great rabbi. And he asks her, why did you bring 2 cups of tea? She says, well, I saw you were starting with this elderly gentleman, and I thought it'd be rude if I only brought 1 cup of tea for you, so I went and got another cup of tea. So he straight away says, will you marry me? So everyone's like surprised, what happened? Every morning he would study with Eliyahu Novi, Elijah the prophet, who revealed himself to this great tzaddik. No one else ever saw him. And he had no idea who this orphan girl was. But if she could see Eliyahu Novi, that was the wife he was looking for. Right? So that's what happens. So back to the Megillah. So Eliyahu Novi came and told Mordechai that that it was the Jews who were the victims, God forbid. So in the middle of verse 1, the Yikra Mordechai's Begodov, Mordechai tore his clothes, like we do, God forbid, we said Shiva, because such a terrible news. The Yilvash Sak V'Eifan, then he changed, he put on sackcloth and ashes. The Yisibet ear, and he went out into the city. The Yizak Za'ak Gedoyla Mara, and he wept, he cried out loud and bitter cry. Verse 2, V'Yavoi Adifnei Sharamelech, and he went up to the king's gate. He couldn't go into the palace compound, because in Lavoi Sharamelech Musak, you're not allowed to go into the palace complex in sackcloth, because it's disrespectful. You have to wear fancy clothes when you go. The whole Medina, and in every province, every place, any place where the king's commands and decrees reached, there was a terrible mourning. All the Jews mourned, the tzayim, and they fast, the bechem mismade, and they wept and they lamented, sak va'efa, sackcloth and ashes, yutzil rabim. This was spread out for the masses.
Rabbi,
yes.
In verse 1, it uses the verb yada,
Yeah.
and it's translated as learn. Does that mean that Mordechai was considered to be a prophet?
Well, possibly, because he was before the destruction of the first base of Mikdash was born. But the Sfarim actually use one uses the term Ruach HaKodesh, which is, we're going to say, we'd probably call that prophecy in English for lack of a better word, but it's a step lower, significantly lower than the Vua, the prophecy of Tanakh. And the other Sfarim tell us it was Eliyahu Novi. That's not necessarily a contradiction. It could be, the two come together. So it means, okay. So,
Rabbi?
yes.
Just before we go too much further, I just remembered Pasuk Yud Gimel that we did before in the previous parak.
Yep.
That has Bahashme, Baharag, Bahalawa, is one of, I believe, 3 psukim in the total of Tanakh that has every letter of the Aleph base in it. There are 3 psukim in the Torah that have every letter of the Aleph base, and this is one of them. And the Rabbanim say that they deserved this decree because they had violated every mitzvah from Aleph to Tav. That's a vart I heard.
Yes.
But I wanted, the reason I'm late with this is because I heard this a while ago. I wanted to just verify, so it took me a while to find every letter in the pasuk before I opened my mouth.
Yeah. No, it is. I mean, I wasn't aware there was only 3. That it makes sense. There wouldn't be many. And but that's right, because we said, unfortunately, and this is what Haman said to the king, that they've assimilated. Many people have assimilated. Just by the way, many people today have assimilated, but it's a different type of assimilation. Most people who have assimilated today is because of lack of education. Right? They left Europe, they came to wherever they came. Yes, there were some people happily threw their tefillin overboard on the ship, when they came. But most people who came, there wasn't proper educational structures for their children. They had to work very long hours. They weren't able to influence their children, and therefore people assimilate. So it wasn't a conscious decision to assimilate. But over here, unfortunately, there were many people, particularly as there had been times, they thought the 70 years were going to be up at a certain time and they're going to be redeemed. And it wasn't. Now, with hindsight, we see the mistake. The 70 years was literally from the destruction. 70 years later, they finished the built base Mikdash. So we see clearly what the 70 years were. But at the time, people had presumed it was at least from when Nebuchadnezzar took control or something else, and they said, that's it. God doesn't care anymore.
Well, they say part of it also was that when it says before, Lasas kol ishva ish, that it was referring to Haman and to Mordechai and Haman. Sorry, somebody just came to ask me to notarize something.
Okay.
The point is that they were both ish, but they weren't, because Haman was va-ish. And the difference between ish and va-ish is an acronym for Yush.
Yeah.
That Haman's mastery was that he got the Jews to give up at that point, or the Jews had given up, and his attitude of coincidence and mikra was also to make people give up. And in fact, the essence of the Avera was that they went to Achashverosh's feast and celebrated the Chorban. Achashverosh is dancing around in the begodim of the Kohen Gadol. They're using the kalim for the Beis HaMikdash, and the Jews are sitting there saying, but it's all kosher, it's okay, we can be here. And that in itself is an insult. It's like chas v'shalom chalila, I wouldn't imagine, but somebody destroyed Jews someplace, and we would go to the celebration of it.
That's right. So anyway, thank you for sharing. So Haman's Ben. Yeah.
Excuse me, yes, I have just one question to Isaac. Is it one of 3 psukim from the Megillah or from the Tanakh? Or...
No, I believe I don't remember exactly, so I can't point to it, but I believe Tanakh.
Okay, thank you.
Torah, it's one of 3 psukim.
It would make sense because there's very few, sentences normally aren't long enough to have every letter. The posuk. So, Mordechai is outside the city. Now we know Esther had her maids, and they only work certain days. So the other days they're out in Shushan. So outside the palace complex, and they see Mordechai. And although they don't know the relationship between Esther and Mordechai, they know that there is some type of friendship or relationship or something. So Esther's maidens came, as well as her, the male servants, the eunuchs. And they distressed her. They told her about it. And so Esther sent fresh clothes for Mordechai to change into and to get out of the sackcloth, but he wouldn't accept them. So, number 3. So what happened was like this. V'tikra Esther lahasaf. Now, Esther called Hassach. Now, although it doesn't say who he is, he was obviously a very great person. And in the Talmud, it tells us that this is the prophet Daniel, who, who'd been thrown to the lion's den by Nebuchadnezzar. So he would have been quite an elderly gentleman at this time. And why was he called Hassach? Because he was cut. He was hatichu from his position, right? When Nebuchadnezzar Belshazzar, he was a great, high-ranking officer. And when the Persians and the Medes came in, they demoted him. So it's called Hassach. Another reason is that he made certain decisions, which is called chesach, of the affairs of state. And part of being demoted, and it does imply a cutting off, he's referred to as, we'll see in the next words. So she called him Masiris Melech, from one of the officers of the king. We know that a Saris generally also means a eunuch. So appears that something not very nice happened to him. So she called him to come before her, but she commanded to go to Mordechai and find out what's going on. Now, even though in Shushan, via Mordechai, they found out who is going to be the victim of this annihilation, God forbid. But in the palace complex, Esther had no idea. So she wants to know. The Yitzchok Hasach el Mordechai. So Hasach went out to Mordechai, Rechova Ir, to the town square, which was in front of the king's gate, in front of the gate to the palace complex. Verse 7. The Gidolei Mordechai es kol asher kara, and Mordechai told him everything that happened. This Pashas hakesef asher amal Haman lishkol al ginzei hamelech v'Yehudim la'abdon, and also about the money that Haman had promised to pay the royal treasury for the annihilation of the Jews, God forbid. Number 8. Bes paskeshen kasav hadas shenosim b'shushan lashmidam nasamloy, and he also gave him a copy of the proclamation of destruction. Laharis is Esther, to show Esther, Lahagilon, to tell her, Sabasalem, to command her, Lava elamelech is chanan lo yavaksh moven alamo, that she should go before the king and plead with him for her people. So this is what happened. So, verse 9. The Yavel Hasach v'yagad the Esther's. Hasach went back and he told Esther, as Divrei Mordechai, everything Mordechai says. 11. But time Esther Hasach, but Taseveyo el Mordechai. So Esther then told Hasach in order to return back to Mordechai and say, Abdei Melech v'amidus Melech Yodim, all the servants of the king and all the people of the kingdoms of the kingdoms know. Any man or woman who goes to the king, to his inner courtyard, a shali kare which has not been summoned, so they go there without being summoned. There's a law that he gets killed. The only exception is if when they come in, the king extends his royal scepter, the golden scepter, then they can live. Now she says, I haven't been called to the king for 30 days. So the implication is he's going to call me sooner or later anyway. The destruction's in 11 months. Right? To go now is suicide. Let me wait till I'm called. So the next verse, number 12. The Gidol Mordechai es Divrei Esther, and they related Esther's words to Mordechai. Now, it's not Hasach anymore. It's now they delivered. So as we said in the introduction, Haman had been watching, and he saw Hasach going backwards and forwards. He got suspicious, and Haman executed him. As we said, he asked him, had a final request, and he whispered it quietly. So Haman put his ear to his mouth to hear the request, and he bit off part of his ear. And that's, of course, how we get Haman's ears, our delicious Hamantaschen. So that's why it's they delivered. Now some of the servants, and Hasach is out of the picture. So, verse 13. The Yom Mordechai lahashiv Esther. Mordechai told and ordered them to return an answer to Esther. Al tadami benafshech. Don't imagine that your soul, the Malach Beis HaMelech Mikol Yehudim, that you're going to escape in the palace any more than the rest of the Jews. So don't think you're going to live because you're the queen. Im hachrish tachrishi beis hazois. If you're going to stay silent at this time, Revach vasalo yamed lehudim makom acham. The Jews will be, there's going to be relief and they'll be saved from somewhere else. Mordechai is saying for a fact the Jews are going to be saved. Hashem, you don't want to do it? Hashem will make it come from somewhere else. However, you and your father's household will die out. For me, a day, and who knows? It may very well have been for this very moment that you became the queen. Okay, so sorry, we're gonna have to leave you in suspense till tomorrow, God willing. That's then tomorrow is our last session. So rather than read the verses, we might just sort of go through a summary. We'll try and finish off, and then on